Welcome everyone to ConnectedLearning.tv. I'm Jeff Brazil. I work with the ConnectedLearning.tv crew based here in Southern California. This is the 35th webinar in our weekly series. And so far our webinar content has been viewed in nearly 100 countries. And we've really enjoyed seeing a great diverse community develop over the last several months since March when we launched. To those watching on live stream, we encourage you to use the chat stream to introduce yourselves, connect with one another, share resources, post questions, and all of those questions will be kept on the document on the website later for today. And then also, if you have questions for the people that are in the Google Hangout today, we'd love those as well. And John Bariloni, our community manager, will help get those into the Hangout group. The URL for our public group notes Google Doc should already be included in the live stream chat. And with these documents, anybody who feels like they want to help capture highlights, share note-taking, responsibilities, share links, anything at all, please dive into that doc and help us with that. It always makes for a greater session. And today's topic is how is digital media changing the ways youth engage politically? We're honored to be joined by a great group in the Google Hangout today. And before our main guest speaker, Joe Kahn, takes the floor to help us kind of frame today's conversation and tee things up, I wanted to give everyone here in the Hangout a chance to briefly introduce themselves. So, Kate, why don't you start us off? Kate, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. I think you're muted.
I am muted. Okay, can you hear me now?
We're good. Go ahead.
Okay, great. I'm very sorry. I'm Kate Rawlinson, the Director of Learning and Engagement at the Wilsonian FIU, Florida International University, which is a state school in Florida. The Wilsonian is a art and design museum, primarily of the modern period, so we have incredible works that deal with propaganda and are great tools for teaching and addressing media literacy in the schools, as well as our after-school programs.
Thanks for being here, Kate. Lee?
I'm Lee Rainey. I direct the Pew Research Center's Internet and American Life project. We study the social impact of the Internet, and we are a non-advocacy, non-partisan organization. We just put out data that we hope is interesting to other people, and we've done a lot of work during this campaign season about how people are using social media and mobile technology in new ways in the election, and so I'll be sharing some of that material during the course of this event.
Thanks, Lee. And Michael?
How's it going, everyone? My name is Michael Lai. I'm a junior studying at Harvard College in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Specifically, I study government, and I'm taking courses on education and civic engagement. It's great to be here. I have a little bit of a background with technology startups, and I'm also currently teaching an 8th grade classroom on civics in Alston. So really excited to be here.
Thanks to all of you. And this could be a timely topic for the day, so I'm looking forward to a good conversation. Our topic today in our conversation will be headed up by Dr. Joseph Kahn, and Joe is the chair of the Digital Media and Learning Research Hub's Youth and Participatory Politics Research Network and a professor of education at Mills College in Northern California. And his research focuses on ways that school practices and new media influence youth, civic, and political development. Dr. Kahn's research and writing mainly focuses on the influence of school practices and new media and sort of how that's changing how youth engage politically and civically. So Joe, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for this opportunity. I am thrilled to be here, and I think this is, as Jeff was saying, sort of the perfect day to be talking about these issues. And I'm gonna, I guess, as I was thinking about today and what we might talk about, one of the things that I thought that I've certainly been feeling, and my sense is that many people in our country are feeling, is that while we recognize how incredibly important a day like today is, first, that we recognize that there's more to civic and political life than voting, and so we have to be thinking both about the election and about all the other things there are. But second, and maybe more fundamentally, I start from the premise that we could be doing better, that our civic and political dialogues and the solutions that we collectively come to could actually be better than where we are right now, and that we have to think carefully about what are the ways in which we could create the kind of dynamic where youth can play an even bigger role in helping make our democracy, tapping the full potential of our democracy. That said, it's really clear that digital media is key to all of this, that increasingly many of the things that young people are doing, or that all people are doing as they engage in civic and political life, have a meaningful online and digital component. So whether we're talking about the ways in which funds are raised, or the ways in which people protest, or the ways in which people express their views on issues, or the ways in which people get mobilized to be active either at the polls or on various sorts of issue campaigns, the digital media are increasingly playing a huge role. And in fact, that many people are concerned that it may be getting in the way of what we might think of as desirable dynamics associated with our democracy, and that others see it as a huge opportunity, and clearly it's a bit of both. And so a big piece of what we're doing with the Youth and Participatory Politics Research Network is trying to understand some of the ways these forms of engagement can be really productive and exciting and present us with new opportunities, and some of the challenges similarly associated with those dynamics. The thing I'll start by sharing a little bit about is a survey that a group of us within that research network did. And in this work, I was partnering with Kathy Cohen at the University of Chicago, as well as with Ellen Middaugh, Ben Boyer, Chris Evans, and John Rogowski, both here and at the University of Washington, on a survey of young people ages 15 to 25. And one of the things that's great about this survey is that we actually were able to oversample African American, Latino, whites, and Asian young people, so we can talk not only about the nation as a whole, age 15 to 25, but about each of those groups. And I guess I'll just start with a few comments about those findings, and then we can move it on to a much broader conversation, as well as obviously looking forward to hearing from everybody on the panel. In thinking about some of the problems or some of the things that may be getting in the way of realizing the potential of democracy, I feel like there's some things that our survey really called into question, things that often are common assumptions that people have. So for example, one of them is that there's a lot of dialogue out there that young people are getting really involved in online forms of activism, and that many of those forms of online engagement get in the way of participation in the election. So young people may tweet about politics, but will they bother to vote? And or are there some people who get really into the digital and other people who get into the sort of on-the-ground electoral politics? And what we found in our survey was pretty clear evidence that it isn't an either or. That, for example, when young people engage in what we call participatory politics, as opposed to sort of electoral or institutional politics, when people are doing even one act a year of participatory politics, they're actually twice as likely to have reported voting as when they don't. So it's really not an either or, it's that young people are getting engaged or they're not. But I don't think we want to, it's somewhat a myth, I think, that the digital media are distracting people away from the electoral side. Another question, or another possible thing, way in which people are worried about the digital media, is that there is a massive digital divide, some people argue, and that what this is going to do is exacerbate forms of inequality when it comes to civic and political voice. And obviously in a democratic society, that kind of inequality would be a huge concern. But again, what we found in our survey was something quite different. In fact, the difference in voting between different groups is substantially larger. So if you're looking, for example, in the 2008, at the last presidential elections, African American young people were the ones most likely to vote, at 52%. And Latinos were the group least likely to vote at 36%. And there I'm talking about Latinos who had citizenship status. So that's a difference of 17% between the highest and the lowest group. When we look at engagement with digital media around participatory politics, the gap between those who were the most involved, which were white kids at 43%, and those who were the least involved was only a 43% to 35%. It was a 7% difference, actually. So we've got a difference of 7% versus 17%. So the inequality we're seeing in online forms of engagement is actually smaller, substantially smaller than the difference that we're seeing in electoral engagement. So if those two things aren't the things perhaps that we should be wondering about, I want to highlight a few things that perhaps we really should be thinking about. And to do this, I'll do a sort of Harper's Index kind of strategy. To start with two numbers, 45 and 84. So 45% was the percentage of young people who said they got news at least once a week from their friends or family via Facebook or Twitter. That's basically the same percentage of people who said they got news by reading magazines or newspapers, whether online or off. So what we're seeing is that with the growth of new media, a huge percentage of young people are getting their news stories from families and friends. The 84% number surprised us. That's the percentage of young people who said they would like help figuring out whether the news and information they get from social media is credible. So what we're seeing is that digital media are providing a lot of opportunity for people to get information, which is obviously good, but we're also seeing a huge need to figure out if it's credible. And I'll pair that, because I think it's important to put it in context, with two other numbers, 47 and 100. So 47% comes out of a very interesting study done in England and Wales, where they asked teachers whether teachers were seeing students provide information that struck them as prepackaged propaganda. And what they found was that 47% of teachers reported that students were putting in classroom discussions or in their essays information that was what they viewed as prepackaged propaganda, things like the Holocaust didn't happen. So not minor levels of propaganda, but really profound levels. And that's obviously a concern, and it speaks to these other issues. But 100% of youth, and frankly 100% of adults, saw TV content in this last election that was deliberately packaged by presidential campaigns and by the super PACs, that was at least misleading, if not as far distorted as arguments that the Holocaust didn't ever happen. And so I think we have to be careful about assuming that the kinds of challenges that we're seeing are simply tied to Twitter and Facebook or tied to these new media frameworks. They're literally much more embedded in our political process at the moment. So if we're going to figure out how to address this, and that's why I'm excited about a number of what some of these panelists are going to talk to, we really have to start figuring out how we're going to deal with media literacy in a powerful way, so that young people are better able both to critically consume and to produce really thoughtful and powerful work that can be shared and can hopefully elevate the quality of both our electoral process as well as much more generally our broad discussion of civic and political issues. So maybe I'll stop with that and some of those findings from the survey, but I look forward to the broader discussion. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Joe. Just a clarification on the 100% number, because when do you ever see 100% of anybody agreeing on anything? So that was part of the survey, and 100% of the...
Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's just a joke.
Oh.
I apologize. Not a very good one. But that basically, I think that we know from the press coverage of the debates and of looking at commercials that there were clearly misleading and very much shaped facts being presented by both parties as well as by the super PACs. And so the idea that we're only getting this problematic information via Twitter or Facebook, I think we really have to be careful with that. It's really something that's much more broader and embedded in the whole system.
Systemic, yeah. No, that's great. So I wanted to give each of you, Kate, Lee, and Michael, just a chance to kind of weigh in on how your own work and your own what your insights are on this topic, and how your work is sort of addressing this topic of how social media is changing the way youth are engaging or not engaging. And anything you have to say about what Joe's just presented, if any of these numbers spiked for you. Michael, I saw you nodding a couple of times. So if there's anything there that really resonated with you. Why don't you start us off, Kate?
Well, I love the idea that you're coming back to the idea of critical literacy or critical thinking in terms of media literacy. I mean, for 12 years, that's been our emphasis, starting with, truthfully, with third grade students through projects such as Media Literacy Project that was addressing tobacco advertising through, as you may know, the state of Florida was led the charge in terms of suing the tobacco companies. And so we were granted funds to increase media literacy in terms of 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade students prior to their taking their first cigarette. And then we moved into a larger study that came through funds from the U.S. federal government, Department of Education, to improve visual literacy and critical thinking and academic achievement. And that project, called Artful Citizenship, really, again, was using materials from our collection to address basic skills of citizenship. And for us, that has to do with not only certainly being able to read the visual language, but also in terms of being able to have different opinions and share them in a respectful manner, and exchange and change your opinions and grow from that. And we use some of our methodologies here of visual thinking strategies and such to do that, to improve students' visual literacy and critical thinking. We've morphed now into this older group with our Teen Thoughts on Democracy project, and we launched a website earlier this year, and it's primarily directed toward teachers. But again, because of our own experience, we found that to just put up a website for students to go to is a lot tougher than trying to, again, use teachers to build those visual literacy and engagement skills. It's game-based. I don't know if you want me to pull it up and share it real quickly, or if we want to do that later, but I can certainly.
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Can you see that now? Okay.
We're still seeing you, Kate.
You're still seeing me? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me, sorry. I am learning how to. Sorry, desktop. How's that?
We're still seeing you.
Still seeing me. Okay.
There you go.
Is it there? Okay,
Yeah.
great. Okay, so this is the
website.
Yeah, this is the website. You know, just very quickly give you a sense. I mean, this grew out of an exhibition to have where designers were challenged to be able to basically remix posters from Norman Rockwell. And so you can see here in the website, there are all of the posters that were created for this exhibition 4 years ago. Actually, it was on display during the presidential election 4 years ago. So contemporary responses to For Freedom's posters and such. So you can see the various designers here. We decided when we received the Rockefeller grant to be able to put this together that we really wanted to work with students here to create the curriculum. So we worked with teens from iPrep, which is a magnet school here in Miami-Dade County Public Schools that is using a lot of digital media learning. And we identified so we're working with teachers as well as teens in high school. And we identified 4 basic issues. We didn't want to just stick with First Amendment, but to try to come up with issues that we thought very much connected to not only the content being addressed in the classes, so that the teachers are learning how to address this in a different way than just through social studies, but also through language arts, and through media and production, creative content, but also to be able to use images in our collection. So we have all sorts of resources for each one of the lessons. You know, that could be from, like, this is a language arts. So there are various websites, worksheets, artworks that the teachers can use in the classroom. So again, a lot of it is about modeling how the teachers can use these materials, because they don't necessarily you know, do this well, and they're not basically taught how to do it in the schools. We also created games. So there are you know, 4 games, and they can be downloaded and printed out and played, and they're low tech. We had a very low budget, so they're low tech games, and but they do give students a chance to have a kind of experiential learning experience prior to going into more directed content, as well as an emotional connection to that. There's all sorts of ways the teachers can extend the lessons, engage the students in conversations. We gave that priority over any other kind of interaction. A lot of discussion going on, and the teacher as a facilitator of discussion. So it's trying to stay very student-centered. And as you can see, that's intolerance. There's also media, which we developed a game called Media Spin, and censorship. There's a kind of hunt that takes place in a city, and they're trying to isolate the person who is to censor, to hunt down this artist who is trying to post their work around the city. So, and there are lots, and again, it's all tied to 21st century skills. There are also lots of resources that are available, such as works from the collection, all from the Wolfsonian collection primarily. Works like this wonderful book on the Scottsboro Boys that shows the drawings from that trial and the artwork, the original book by the artist. So again, using primary source materials and trying to engage in a very active and entertaining, I would say, way in some ways, that through the artworks, at the same time as addressing, I'm afraid I'm going to lose you guys, addressing the content of those particular themes. Are you there?
We're here.
You're there. Okay, sorry. I couldn't find my screen there for a second. I'm way too Dale-oriented here at the museum, I'm afraid. So it gives you a little idea. We do have an interact section here, which is for the teacher to be able to set up a forum and for students to be able to post images and content, videos and such that they create in the class setting. And so the forums can be open, or they can be invitation only, because it's always a concern of teachers to try to keep it, to not have other people into the site. But they can post all kinds of things and get students' response and such. So this is where we're hoping this will happen. It's not happening yet, so we're going to be doing some teacher workshops in the coming months and getting teachers actually using the materials. And it's also available online in terms of, for those teachers who feel like they need a printed workbook, it exists. So, but there are lots of resources here for teachers to use.
Well, it's great that this was mined. It sounds like it was mined from a lot of youth engagement and involvement. So that's terrific.
Absolutely. The games were tested by students, and the teachers were very engaged in watching what was going on through our process.
Great. Hey, Lee, I know you've done a lot. You guys have done a lot of work on this subject of late. So please weigh in here.
Yes.
I'm struck right off the bat in hearing Joe speak about his new data about how the world of youth is really not very different from the world of people who are older than youth and people who are in their 30s and 40s. Across the board, the phenomena that Joe was seeing in his data maps with what we have seen in our broader surveys of adults. So, for instance, the people who are most active in social media, no matter what their age, are also more likely to be active in their communities, be civically minded, offer and get social support from their friends. And so there's a way in which sort of everybody who is in these spaces tends to be of this type. They're social, they're in many cases political. They certainly want to help out their neighbors and their friends and the people in their networks. And that just sort of rings through our data. The other sort of major thing that I was hearing Joe talk about was how in social media spaces, there's a little bit more diversity and equality than there is potentially in other places where civic activity occurs. in our data, we did a survey with the great Sidney Verba and Kay Schlossman and Henry Brady right in the middle of the 2008 election, and we're repeating it this year. And one of the striking things we found is that in lots of online activities, signing online petitions, interacting with news organizations online, attending online meetings, there was the same kind of social stratification as there always has been in the offline world. People who have more resources, people who have higher levels of education are more likely to be engaged with online civic activities than people who have less resources and less educational attainment. However, the exception to that was people who were participating in civic life through social media. There, the playing field was very level. There was not any social stratification showing up by income and by education levels. There was a greater opportunity for people feeling that they had voice and feeling like they were participating in social media. If they were using Facebook or Twitter, then in its earliest stages, now, of course, so much more important to civic culture. And I think we're going to see a lot of that same dynamic applying out here. These are special spaces, of course, for young people. They feel like they're, of course, news sources for them. They feel like these are spaces where they can mobilize their friends and talk about politics. There are some people, there are more youth reported to us, or more young voters reported to us than older voters, that they had changed their mind based on things that they had observed in social media conversations. So there's a sense that these are rich new spaces for civic and political activity rather than diminished smaller places for activity. And I love the idea that Joe is seeing in his data that people who are involved in social media spaces are also very much involved in all kinds of ways. These are blended worlds. These are not separate worlds. They amplify each other and complement each other in interesting ways. When it comes to our data on the digital divide, we don't actually see divides, at least in access to technology, that are very pronounced anymore. About 80% of teenagers own cell phones, and fewer of them have smartphones than adults in their life. But those numbers are keep going up, and they look like sort of standard adoption numbers for any kind of technology. Same with internet use. Now it's about 96% of teenagers use the internet, and there aren't large differences by social class, by race or ethnicity. And sure, there are some people who feel remote from the technology and from this world, but it's a pretty small cohort, even if you compare it to adults. What's more interesting, I think, is the another dimension of what Joe was talking about. Was the concern that lots of people have, starting with teachers. We just did a massive survey of teachers and advanced placement teachers, so teachers who are teaching college-bound students in our culture. They're very worried about the media literacy skills of their students. They say that students are not very adept researchers in many cases. In their minds now, research equals Google, and whatever Google tells them is good enough for them and what they are willing to report with others. And so teachers are worried about that, even as they celebrate the kinds of things that, again, Joe was talking about. There's greater richness of resources available to students. If they're motivated to dig into a subject, they've got a much broader opportunity now to study to the depths that they want in the subject that they care about. And they love having that control over their educational environment. So there's a paradox in the data that shows up in all kinds of places. A lot of excitement about what the possibilities are, a lot of concern about literacy skills and whether students are well equipped to find the best information, the most useful stuff, and participate in interesting ways. That's the final point I'll make here. It seems to me, and I'd be really interested in everybody else's reaction to this, when you talk to young people, they have an expansive sense of citizenship and civic duty and participatory life. It's not just what's going on in politics, and it's not even what's going on in the broader institutions of their community. They're creating their own networks to solve problems. They're creating their own groups to address issues that they don't think that others are addressing well enough for them. So there's a way that this network environment is allowing people essentially to form activist groups on the fly and to do some problem solving, or at least have some debate over what's going on, and maybe not last for a long time. Maybe these groups disband or they sort of wither away in a period of time, but there's a palpable sense that these are spaces that we can manipulate and use for our own purposes, and it doesn't so much matter what the bigger institutions or the more powerful institutions are doing. If we've got things that we want to say or things that we want to do, we have new tools available for us now to pitch our voice into the commons and to try to get things done.
Thanks, Lee. We're starting to get some questions from the live stream, which we'll jump to in a little bit. But Michael, I definitely wanted to hear your perspective on this, and I've seen you nodding several times during key moments here. So please weigh in.
So first of all, I guess disclaimer, most of the reason why I was nodding is because I'm currently taking a class, and our week this week is actually on the connection between the internet, digital media, and civic engagement. So it's interesting to hear some of this research that I've actually just been reading about and I'm writing a paper about right now, said straight from the people who are doing it. So it's a very meta moment for me. But a couple of things I want to talk about. First of all, with regards to, I guess the perspective that I'm taking on it is really as someone who is interested in trying to innovate in this realm. So exactly as Joe was describing, trying to create the networks of activism to make things happen. So last year I was involved in a civic engagement startup called Town Hall 140. It's no longer happening, and Joe also was very prescient about that. It's very short-lived. But basically it was an issue that we thought, well, one was happening in the Harvard community, but also sort of in the nation as a whole, is that there was a sort of increasing gap between the interests of citizens, ordinary citizens, and the interests of politicians and policymakers. So one thing we did is we created this online video chat platform to try to connect these two groups of people together. So we would host speakers, we would host politicians, and then we would have people go online onto this video town hall and then ask basically anything, a democratic free-for-all. So we hoped. So the question for me, though, and one of the reasons why I stopped, and I'm really more focusing on the academic side of things, is that I am struggling to find a sense of how some of these new internet startups, which are purporting to address all these civic engagement issues, fit into the traditional system, how much of an impact they actually make. So in terms of, I do agree that, and I think digital media literacy is super important, but how much of that is coming from some of these new innovations, and how much of this is coming from through the traditional, public schooling or what have you, and what efforts are done through the traditional system, which I think has much more scale and reach as of right now. So that's a question I wanted to pose to everyone.
Thanks, Michael. One question we had coming out of the live stream, which kind of pivots off of what you're saying, Michael, is, and this is for anyone who wants to weigh in on this. What evidence do we have that under 18 youth are influencing national level politics? So getting to that sense of impact on the system, as Joe kind of waved at. Who wants to tackle that? Anyone?
Stories? I'll take a seat. Go, Joe. Go for it.
So, I mean, I think it's a very important kind of question, and I guess I'd like to try to reframe it just a little bit before I answer it. So when we say impact, I think it's really important that we think about what we mean by impact and what that might constitute. And to some degree, that requires that we also think about what do we mean by politics. So there are relatively few issues where youth under 18 are leading the charge that revolutionizes the way Congress designs a policy. And clearly one of the questions around digital media in general, we know that it gives people voice. It's less clear when, how, and why it influences actual institutional politics and has that kind of influence. But if one understands politics to be the shaping of dialogues and weighing in on issues, one of the fabulous things about the digital media is they provide ways for young people to be extremely active and vocal and to be part of a broader national conversation in a way that prior to these media would have been very hard. Because if you've got to go to an institutional platform, to have the Sierra Club give you a platform before you can speak, the opportunities for young people are quite limited. But if anybody can blog or anybody can circulate information, you can have quite a big impact. So we found, for example, that roughly 15% of young people are circulating news and information throughout their social network related to political issues. We found that 45% of young people are reading those things that get circulated at least once a week. Well, that's an impact on the conversation. So young people are having an impact on what their friends read, on what their families read. They're having an impact whenever they comment as part of those threads. Certainly, if we look at things like the Dream activists, we see folks who aren't even citizens in the legal sense having a profound impact on the ways in which a crucial policy issue like immigration reform is being shaped and discussed. So I think there are lots of avenues facilitated by the digital media for folks under 18 to have impact.
What's coming to mind, Joe, as I'm listening to you talk about these, about having sort of a more lavish definition of politics and impact. When I think about Martha Payne, the little girl from the UK, who started taking pictures of her lunch at her school to show the poor lunches that the school is being served. And the last thing I read about her is she sort of started this sort of global movement with kids with more nutritious lunches in the school. And the school tried to have her blog taken down, and there was a huge hue and cry in the country. And then recently the Malala, I think, is the young girl from Pakistan who was shot by the Taliban for being an advocate at 14 years old or as a teenager for education for young people. And the largest public gathering for Pakistan in her favor, to support her happened recently. And now there's a online petition on change.org to have her nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. It's been signed by 50,000 people in a few days. So yeah, if you have that more lavish definition of what you're saying in terms of politics and impact, it seems like, stories are data too, right? It's not a number, but it seems like an indication. Those are the things that come to mind as I listen to you talk. Kate or Lee or Michael, do you have anything on that?
Go ahead.
I was going to actually mention the fundraising possibility. It's a powerful way that people of all ages are now attracting resources to the things that matter to them. Aside from the context of fundraising, look at the KONY 2012 video. Whatever you think of the virtues of that video, it was driven into the national and even global conversation by young people talking about it in social media and convincing, gatekeepers of the culture like Oprah Winfrey and Ryan Seacrest to talk about it. And there are two other things that came out of our teacher survey that are more immediate to young people's lives, that they seem to have an enormous impact just on the media ecosystem around them. The first is they're convincing their teachers that the idea of a distracted generation, a generation that can't focus and is content with sort of quick little snippets of stuff, they're arguing for a different definition of how to think about people allocate their attention in these new media spaces. And we heard a lot from teachers about their worries that the new distracted generation is coming along. But one of the things that clearly is happening in classrooms is teachers are now thinking differently about distraction and the whole notion of distraction, because their students say, look, we're functioning in a different way in our media spaces from the way that you grew up. Don't necessarily hold it against us. Teach us in ways that relate to this. That was one of the nice things that I sort of read between the lines in some of Joe's data, that their cry for more help in media literacy and finding high quality information is this is the environment we're in. Don't worry about our attention spans as much as help us navigate these spaces. And the biggest surprise in our data was that 42% of teachers said that they now allow their students to look up information in class on their smartphones. Now, a couple of years ago, smartphones were banned in most classrooms, and there are still lots of classroom rules about it, but there are ways now that teachers are observing what their students are doing and trying to respond to that new environment, and students are arguing for their own interests in these in really sort of powerful ways that are changing policies literally in the classrooms in which they sit.
Kate, I think you had something you wanted to lean in on?
Yeah, I was kind of more connecting to the question itself about 18-year-olds and their impact on national politics. I don't know that that's the question we want to be asking. I think 18-year-olds should be involved in their own personal politics and issues, and then at some point in the future, or for some percentage of them, yes, they're engaged in the larger global or national or global politics, as Lee was mentioning it. But you know, if you can get students involved in their own education, like through the democratic school movement, or having some input into the concerns that are relevant to their lives, to me, that's where you start. You know, I just think we've got to let them tell us what they're interested in, and that will engage them. I don't think you have to worry about attention span when it's something that they care about. The attention span's right there. They're engaged.
Joe, you had a question. You wrote this article recently, which I think John will probably put into the live stream chat, which had a couple of really interesting provocations in it that a couple of which I wanted to circle back to. And one of them was, you have this line in there about that schools, to Kate's point, schools will continue to play a vital role in preparing students to be citizens, but educators must be prepared to play by different rules. So it's a very different, being a civically involved and civically engaged is a very different game than it was, or a thing to be involved in than it was even just a few years ago. Can you speak to that? And then also the second point that your article makes is that schools can't be the only place, you know, where civic engagement and civic participation is taught and developed and cultivated. We need sort of other places in the ecosystem.
No, sure. I'm happy to jump in and just to clarify. So there's an article just came out in the most recent issue of Untitled Chapter where we talk about a bunch of these dynamics and really are trying to highlight the ways in which taking digital media seriously has to influence the way civic educators are preparing young people to tap this potential. So the first thing about the different rules, one of the biggest aspects of that is the fact that institutionalized gatekeepers, while still incredibly important, don't control as many of the levers and access points as they once did. So where before, when young people said, well, there's an issue I care about, it was sort of like, well, you can write a paper on it for your teacher. You can, if you can get your student government to care about an issue, good for you. You can go volunteer on a campaign, but mostly what you're going to do is, is stuff mailings. Now you can literally go and join in conversations and have a massive audience potentially, or a audience with your own social network that can be quite powerful. Gatekeepers just don't play the same role. So if gatekeepers aren't playing the same role, one of the things schools have to think about, for example, is how do you help young people judge credibility when they can be getting information from any number of sources? How do you help them learn about places to go to get different perspectives on issues so that they don't end up just looking in one place? For example, we found in one of our studies, it's not surprising, it's not rocket science, but it is important that when teachers required that young people get multiple perspectives on an issue by going online, that young people were much more likely to say that during their discretionary time, they looked for multiple perspectives on issues when going online. So in other words, we can help young people see that those options exist, figure out how to use them, and take advantage of them. Similarly, if we know that kids can play a big role in producing and sharing and creating stuff about the issues they care about, there may be powerful ways that educators can support those processes, teaching kids how to be effective producers and shapers and creators and circulators of information. The second thing, which really ties into all of this, is that schools are just not the only game in town, and it's really important to both recognize the important role that educators can play, but it's equally important for educators to recognize, or teachers to recognize, that education happens in many spaces. So obviously there's the extracurricular space and the role the mentors play as well, but there's also just the ways in which young people interacting with platforms of various kinds are going to be very impactful and are going to get very engaged, and I think we want to be paying attention to that. One of our findings is around something we call digital social capital. So when young people are engaged in the cultural sphere, when they're going out and taking part online, engaging with hobbies or clubs or music or sports, it appears that they're picking up skills and they're broadening their networks in ways that both expose them to more diverse points of view, and also that increase the likelihood that they'll engage civically and politically. So I think there are lots of ways that we've sort of viewed the digital world as a distraction, when actually many aspects of cultural engagement online actually appears to be a support for digital engagement in politics.
Michael, I think you had a point you wanted to leap in on here.
Yes, so first of all, tying that together and looping it back into some of the Facebook data that Joe, you were presenting earlier, I do want to corroborate the fact that I probably get most of my news through my Facebook network. So that I think that data point is resonates with me there. One thing is, I wonder if this, given that a lot of this information, although it is more widely dispersed, and as you said, the traditional gatekeepers don't have as much control, does this put more power in the hands of certain companies such as Facebook, Google, and YouTube that are the holders of this online information? And especially, it seems like some of these companies, especially I'm thinking Wikipedia and Google, have gotten somewhat politically partisan, as in, like, I'm thinking last year with the whole SOPA movement. So I wonder what that means for us as citizens, either to be lobbying these companies instead of policymakers, or what have you, to be partisan in a certain direction because of the tremendous power they potentially hold. The other thing is, I think I agree with your notion that schools aren't the only ballgame in town, or in terms of teaching kids to find credible sources of information and empowering kids. I think one idea that I have, thinking, I have a really good friend who is really interested in how to curate information. So every week, he's playing on this idea that we are getting most of our information sources from our friends in our immediate networks. So what he does is he combs through news and he curates this digest every week. And basically, if I were to be honest about saying, how much of my daily or how much of my weekly news is from that digest, I would say it's a large percentage. He does a really good job curating it, and he's a friend that I trust, and I think he's very bright. So I wonder if one solution to this problem is we can empower youth leadership to be information curators. And that way, if we empower certain youth leaders to be, well, first of all, very good about deciding which information is good or bad and presenting multiple angles, but then empowering them to curate that information and realizing that they have an effect on their immediate network, as opposed to just posting any random thing that they find interesting on the web.
Lee, I wanted to turn to something I saw in an article about one of the studies that you guys recently did at Pew. And it was a quote from a student at Harvard. I think it was one of your last surveys, but the quote was, "It is easier than ever to find people who agree with you and to shout out those who don't." And I wanted to get anybody's opinion from any of you on sort of what is that an indicator of? And it sounded like it was sort of, Kate, this was sort of touching on your area, it seemed like. But so is that a true thing? And sort of what do we do about that? And what is an indication of?
Well, our data show it's a little bit true. In most cases, when the topic is politics, and probably when we were asking people, they had a pretty narrow definition of politics as they were responding to us. The vast majority of people in social networking sites see a decent share of argument and disputed discourse on their sites. They don't live in echo chambers, at least in the way that they're constructing their networks. Most of the time when they see stuff from their friends that disagrees with their point of view, they just ignore it. They don't take further steps. Sometimes they challenge it, but the vast majority simply ignore it, and it's particularly true of younger folks. But there are a share of people who seem to be sort of honing their networks to be a little bit more politically simpatico with them. So in our broad data, 18% of social network users have blocked someone or unfriended someone on the basis of their political posts. Sometimes it wasn't necessarily that they disagreed with the content, but that person was just way too much into politics. It was saying too much, and it wasn't an appropriate topic for the network as far as the user was concerned. So it's not just sort of disagreement, it's just some people just talk too much about politics. and 16% of people that actually friended someone new because they liked the political posts that person had made. So if you reverse those numbers, 82% are not acting this way when it comes to blocking people, and 84% are not actively seeking out people who agree with them. So there are ways that people are living in homophilous networks, and people who are kind of like them and kind of share the same experiences. But it's in a very broad context. It's not just about politics. It's people who live in their worlds, their friendship worlds, their school worlds, their communities, if they're working in their workplaces. And politics isn't the orientation of most social networks. And so, there's reason to be interested and concerned about this, but this doesn't seem to be a dominant way that people are orienting the most civic and political information that's flowing into their lives.
Joe, what insights do you guys had some insights on this from the survey results on this whole notion of echo chamber and whether or not people are attracted to or able to get more reinforcing opinions?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think our results, I think, do parallel in many respects what Lee was talking about. I think there maybe are two dynamics that I think we'd highlight. The first is that we probably worry more about echo chambers than we should, in a certain respect, and probably worry less about empty chambers than we should. So part of what Lee was saying is most people are not focusing on engaging in conversations about politics. And if they've got someone in their social network who is really focused on that, they don't want to be there. That in many respects is a bigger problem in a certain sense when it comes to civic and political life than the idea that some people are only exposed to perspectives that align with their own. We see a lot of young people, depending how you look at it, it could be somewhere between a third and a half of young people pretty much avoiding civic and political conversations pretty completely. Now, it's not that we need everybody to be a political junkie, but in a democracy where everybody's voice matters, and in fact, you really want everybody to have some exposure and some engagement. One of the ironies of a lot of election cycles when it gets towards the end is that the biggest fight is for the votes of the people who pay the least attention to the issues. And it's not clear that you want the people who pay the least attention to the issues to be with the ones who have the power to decide. So what we'd like is to lift everybody's engagement to a certain degree. But the other thing is that many of these people have issues that do matter in their lives, but they may be alienated or disconnected from the ways to actually affect those things. And so what we want is educational institutions, we want the web, we want other things to bring them in. So the focus on echo chambers is not unimportant, but I think we really want to pay attention to the number of people who are just trying to distance themselves from all things political and civic. When it comes to echo chambers, there clearly is, and I think this gets lost, a plus and a minus. In other words, there's a value to being in a community where people share enough that they can support one another's thinking around it and build an intellectual framework for understanding the issues. But you want to make sure that they're simultaneously getting exposed to divergent ways of thinking. And we find, frankly, that those who are the most politically interested get that exposure. They do perhaps go to Fox News or go to MSNBC, but they also go to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Economist. In other words, the people who are really interested go lots of places for the news because they're interested. So they're getting that exposure. One of the perhaps biggest needs is helping people figure out how to have productive dialogues across difference. So it's not just, do we see these other points of view, but do we actually engage, and do we have the skills to engage productively with people who disagree with us? And I think that's one of the things we're seeing again and again is really important.
Go ahead, Kate.
Can I tune in here? This is something that underlies pretty much all of our projects here in terms of visual literacy and critical thinking projects, is to engage students in a method that teaches them how to have conversations, that they can express an opinion, provide evidence for that opinion, perhaps persuade another person in the room who had a different opinion, to change their mind, to revise their opinion, or to still to disagree, but they have a conversation, and it's respectful, and it's a methodology called visual thinking strategies, and I recommend everyone take a look at it. It can be used in many different contexts, and is being used in many different contexts these days to facilitate conversations and meaning making. And for classroom teachers, I think it's a wonderful tool, or for any kind of out of school setting also, because museums are using it a great deal, to be able to learn how to facilitate a conversation. So to remove yourself from being that single voice of authority, and to engage the group and vocalizing their own opinions and providing evidence to why they hold those opinions, and not necessarily getting to an end result where everyone's agreeing and voting the same way, but at least have taken the discourse up a notch. I also wanted to point out very quickly that I spoke earlier today with Charlene Ortuño, who is a language arts teacher that worked with us at IPrep Academy in the Dade County Public Schools. And I asked her, she couldn't participate because she's actually working poll today. But I asked her, just to address this question of today's Hangout session. And she said that most of her students at this point are using Twitter and Tumblr much more than Facebook, and as a kind of messaging and exchange of information system. There's some comments going on, but I love that idea that Lee mentioned earlier, or Michael, I think, perhaps mentioned earlier, of students facilitating conversations. And I think if we can teach our students facilitation skills. My son just participated in such a session around democratic schools in Vermont. There is a conference taking place, I think, next week in Vermont, of high school students who are trying to move forward these ideas about what constitutes learning in high school. And the democratic school movement, which is embracing input from the learner, I think is a big shift that we need to be paying attention to. Charlene, the two other topics that issues that she said she thought need to be addressed is that the students are engaged when it comes to talking about the things they care about. Healthcare, they seem to care about. They don't care about politics per se. They care about issues, whether college tuition, financing of college, what they're going to be doing next, whether they'll have jobs. They don't seem to support one party or the other. It's not about Democrat and Republican. It's about where you stand on an issue. So that national politics issue to me it's just not relevant to a lot of teenagers. It's more about their lives and the quality of their lives.
Thanks, Kate. We are getting, believe it or not, to the top of the hour, and we will want to close as quickly as possible at the top of the hour. And I wanted to give everybody a chance to weigh in with some final thoughts. And the discussion's gone quickly, and it's been deep and wide, and just appreciate everybody. But let's start with you, Michael.
Sure. Thought it was a great discussion. Thanks everyone for participating, and I really was happy to get the chance to participate as well. Learned a lot from it. It was a really great synthesis of everything. I think one thing, just building off of what Kate was saying, is that I am really interested in how do you make that connection between getting kids just interested in the issues and connecting that to the broader political sphere. Because I think there is a fundamental misconception of what politics is. Politics, kids tend to conflate politics with just what's seen on TV, partisanship, et cetera, but I think it does. Those skills of participation, of conversation, facilitation, negotiation, I think these cut through everything in our lives, all the way down to, I don't know, was it Kate you mentioned earlier, lobbying for things, even fundamental change in your classroom. So I think if we can make that link right there, I think that is critical in both, changing people's perceptions of what politics is and their alienation with it, and also getting kids involved.
Thanks, Michael. Lee?
I just want to plus one Michael's thought that the companies themselves are big actors in this environment. And even though youth are not necessarily fully informed about what's going on and how information is being delivered to them by the biggest players in their life, like Facebook and Google. The fact of the matter is they know probably a lot more than their parents do, and they're actually more active in managing the information flows than their parents are. So elevating those voices and those capacities and figuring out that there are sort of new centers of influence that can be accessed is a great and important idea, and Michael was spot on by saying that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. Kate, and then Joe.
Well, I just, I agree with them wholeheartedly. I guess I would like to say that I think we need to teach students that they're not always going to be comfortable. Discourse is not always comfortable, that you disagree with people, and it may happen by very, very tiny increments that you actually change opinions. But at least if you put your idea out there in a respectful way, you're making a connection. Perhaps people will walk away, like my cousins who unfriend me when I express my political opinions on Facebook. But, you know, we're in a discourse. You know, they know me, they love me, they unfriend me, but they tolerate me.
Kate, we will all friend you immediately after this session. Yeah, we'll make up for some of that. Joe, go ahead and close us out.
Well, I just again want to thank you, Jeff, and everybody. This was a really valuable and interesting conversation to be a part of. So I appreciated that. It just really feels like what we're saying is that the dynamics of politics are shifting, and the digital media is a big part of that. It's not an online world versus an offline world, as Lee said. It's an integrated whole, but the role that the digital media, along with some other major shifts, are playing are actually changing the ways in which young people and all of us are participating. And we need to think both as educators about how we support that so that it develops as well as it possibly can. But we also just need to try to understand what's going on so that we're not responding to old models and old visions of what it means to be civically and politically engaged.
I want to thank everybody, Joe and Kate and Lee and Michael, and it was a really good conversation. It always goes too quickly, but some great subjects were raised and great questions asked. And to keep the conversation going and for all of us to keep learning, we encourage you to continue using the Twitter hashtag #ConnectedLearning, and posting in the comments section of this webinar's page in the archive section of www.connectedlearning.tv. On that same page, just a little bit later today, we'll have a full recording of the webinar, a link to the publication, any publications that were referenced today, and a lot of other curated content that our team will work on for you to learn from and share. Our next session is Tuesday, November 13th at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. It'll be with Henry Jenkins from the University of Southern California, exploring the concept of youth as the transmedia generation. Thanks again to everybody for joining us, for participating and contributing. And if you haven't already, go vote. See you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks.